two sisters, May and Drew, are traveling to a remote location for a scuba diving adventure. During their car ride, the two sisters engage in an awkward small talk, and their conversation suggests they are estranged and share a complicated past. It becomes evident that May is generally detached from the entire family, as she has no idea that Drew is now living together with their mother. Neither of them knows much about each other's recent lives, and although Drew shows more interest in getting to know her elder sister May, May appears quiet and uninterested. It is gradually revealed that the two sisters only meet once a year for the diving adventure. Despite Drew being very excited and enthusiastic about the adventure, May shows less excitement. As they arrive at a rocky mountainside with no one else in sight, the sisters descend a cliff heading to a remote beach. Despite her lack of enthusiasm, May is more safety conscious and ensures they have extra oxygen cylinders and safety equipment, featuring the latest technology. On the other hand, Drew appears to be more interested in getting into the water. After getting geared up, the sisters finally dive into the cold water. Descending slowly into the water, May follows Drew as they head towards a deep cave. They discover a comfortable breathing chamber and decide to ascend inside the cave, where the water level allows them to breathe without using oxygen masks. At this moment, Drew tries to initiate a conversation with her sister and asks May if everything is really okay between them and whether she actually enjoys their annual diving activity together. However, May avoids the confrontation and proceeds to dive back into the water. Drew follows May behind from a distance, but moments later, May suddenly stops and the atmosphere grows silent. Catastrophe strikes when a natural disaster occurs and rocks suddenly begin raining down from above. Drew manages to avoid most of the falling debris and quickly finds cover. However, when the rockfall finally stops, Drew realizes she has lost sight of May, and she begins panicking while desperately calling out to her using the intercom system. Drew slowly descends down in search of her sister. Meanwhile, due to the mixture of debris and ocean sand in the water, Drew is unable to see through the cloudy atmosphere. She secures herself to a rock, using it as an anchor. As Drew struggles to navigate through the narrow passages between the rocks, she notices May's light shining and eventually finds her. However, May's leg is stuck under a rock and she is unable to move. The two sisters attempt to lift the rock and Drew tries to pull May out, but all their attempts fail to succeed. May then devises a plan. Drew must return to the surface to retrieve extra oxygen cylinders and a jack from the car to enable them lift the heavy rock. However, May has only 20 minutes of air left, hence Drew must be back with both the items before time runs out. Drew appears confused and reluctant to leave her sister behind. Meanwhile, May seems tough and calm, and gradually encourages Drew to realize the urgency of the situation. Eventually, Drew swims back up to the surface as the clock instantly starts kicking, leaving her sister behind. Meanwhile, May has recurring flashbacks to times when they were young and swimming with their father. Upon surfacing, Drew discovers that the two spare cylinders and the bag containing their mobile phones and the car keys are buried beneath the collapsed rocks due to the earlier rockfall. She attempts to move the rocks and reach the items, but fails. With no alternative, Drew rushes up to the cliff and heads towards their parked car, containing two more spare cylinders and a jack. However, she recalls the keys inside the buried bag and resorts to breaking the car window using a rock, luckily accessing the spare oxygen cylinders. But still, the car's trunk fails to open without the car keys, hence she is unable to get the jack. Frustrated but not willing to give up, she uses her small knife to slit open the backseat, hoping to access the trunk. Despite her efforts, she fails to reach the back trunk. With the clock ticking, Drew resorts to a map and discovers there is a possible house nearby. She takes the two spare oxygen cylinders from the car and descends the cliff. Drew then checks the oxygen level in her cylinder, and just before diving back into the water, she spots a boat at a distance. She tries to call out for help and grab its attention, but to no avail. However, realizing that she has less than 2 minutes to get the spare oxygen cylinder down to May or else she runs out of oxygen, Drew quickly grabs one of the cylinders and dives back into the water. But as she makes the dive, the cylinder accidentally slips from her hand and sinks. Meanwhile, May is desperately fighting to hold her breath after the oxygen level in her cylinder completely drops. But just in time, Drew makes it to May and instantly gives May her own air supply. Drew informs her sister about the cylinder she accidentally dropped and insists on quickly retrieving the fallen cylinder. Drew further explains that she plans to free dive, hence she will have to leave May with her own oxygen cylinder as she recovers the fallen cylinder. Drew proceeds to navigate through the water, but a few minutes later, May notices that Drew's oxygen cylinder pipe has been leaking. On the other hand, Drew manages to retrieve the fallen cylinder and then makes her way back to May, and the sisters switch their oxygen supply. May asks Drew about the jack she was supposed to bring along, and Drew informs her that the buried car keys and mobile phones made it impossible to access the trunk or call for any help. However, May appears disappointed by her response. Drew then informs May about the house on the map that appears about a mile away. She also tells her about the boat and her plan to surface and ask for help. However, May responds that the house is not an option as it is too far. May further warns Drew about her leaking oxygen pipe and instructs her to make a 5 minutes decompression stop first before resurfacing, to expel nitrogen from her blood. Despite her sister's instruction to decompress, Drew insists on ascending back to the surface before the boat leaves, remaining hopeful that she will find some help in the boat. However, upon resurfacing, Drew completely loses sight of the boat. As a consequence of failing to make a decompression stop, Drew experiences an episode of decompression sickness, accompanied by vomiting and a bloody nose. Meanwhile, May is trying to keep calm to avoid using up too much oxygen as she struggles to convince herself to stop thinking. However, she has flashbacks of a time when the two sisters as young girls were training with their father. May then recalls an earlier conversation with Drew and wishes she had given a different response. Running out of options, Drew decides to seek help from the nearby house on the map. She runs towards the location on the map and finds a building, which appears to be a small church. Drew desperately calls out for help and looks around, but no one is home. She resorts to breaking inside the locked room through the window and tries to find any tool that might help her with the car. Drew finds a hammer, and before leaving, she leaves behind a message on the map asking for help, hoping that if someone returns to the place sometime soon, they could find her message and head to the beach where May is trapped. Back in the water, May is struggling to fight the negative thoughts from her traumatic childhood. It becomes apparent that during the sisters' younger days, the girls' father used to give them training on how to be underwater. Their father would hold May's head beneath the water, forcing her to endure extreme breathing exercises and pushing her beyond her limits. However, May had always been afraid of being underwater and struggled during the practice exercises, even though Drew was good at it and was unaware of May's fear and distress. As a result, May started to feel that Drew has always acted all innocent and special, while she had to bear the negative thoughts alone in silence and hate herself. Additionally, May has always felt resentful and blamed Drew for being the reason that she lost something important to her. On the surface, Drew heads back to the car with the hammer she found back in the church. She tries to break the trunk open with the knife and hammer, but it fails to work. Frustrated, Drew resorts to rolling the car down the hill, hoping to break the trunk open. Luckily, she succeeds and finally gets access to the trunk. However, against her expectation, she realizes that there is no jack inside the car, but instead an air pressure foaming spray that fixes punctures. With all hope lost, Drew appears to accept the tragic fate that she may not be able to save her sister as she hoped. However, a few minutes later, she spots a broken signboard nearby and takes the wooden pole, hoping it might help overturn the rock on May's leg. Determined, Drew tightly covers the hole on her oxygen cylinder pipe with the foaming puncture spray and a tape. She again dives back into the water, carrying along an oxygen cylinder and the wooden pole. Upon returning to May, she finds her in a state of confusion, experiencing hallucinations caused by high nitrogen levels in her body. Drew manages to convince her to get back to her normal self, and the two start working together to get the rock off May's leg. Drew uses the wooden pole to lift the rock, as May struggles to push the rock with her body. During the second attempt, the rock eventually starts moving. However, the wooden pole suddenly breaks. At the same time, Drew realizes that the cylinder's valve, which she had fixed on the surface, has already damaged due to the foam she applied. The two sisters are left in despair and completely out of ideas. Surrendering to her fate, May tells Drew to go back to the surface, hence leave her behind. However, Drew is not willing to give up this time. She comes up with a plan to pump her inflatable buoyancy control device jacket beneath the rock, to use it as an airlift and help in lifting up the rock. But unfortunately, the pressure causes the jacket's safety valve to open and release air. Drew then realizes that she is almost out of air. At this point, left with no other alternative and disheartened, the two sisters decide to say their goodbyes to each other. May tells Drew that it is okay to now let go, as she tried all she could. She then insists Drew heads up immediately and make a decompression stop. However, Drew refuses to give up on her sister. Against May's wish, Drew removes her safety equipment and dives to the surface, once again failing to make a decompression stop. However, from the rising nitrogen levels in her body, Drew's health appears to gradually worsen, to a point where she hallucinates about her father. Despite her dire health condition, Drew fights hard and manages to dive back into the water and return to May. This time, she brings along the foaming spray and fills the jacket's valve with the foam. She begins pumping the inflatable jacket while using all her energy to move the rock further. Eventually, the rock moves and Drew finally succeeds in freeing May. However, due to high nitrogen levels absorbed in her body and failing to decompress, then using up all her energy to lift the rock, Drew suddenly collapses underwater. Swiftly, May takes Drew to a comfortable breathing chamber within a cave they had earlier visited. May strictly instructs Drew to stay in the chamber for as long as possible and buy herself time to decompress, or else she will die when she gets back to the surface. However, the chamber is small and only a little conducive air is left for Drew, who now needs it more than May. Therefore, May decides to leave the chamber to avoid using up more oxygen and free dives to get the filled oxygen cylinder, whose valve had damaged. Meanwhile, as the air depletes, Drew is desperately battling to stay alive and eventually loses consciousness. May, on the other hand, positions the oxygen cylinder between two rocks and manages to get its valve working, hence allowing the cylinder's oxygen to fill the chamber with fresh oxygen to help Drew breathe. Upon discovering that Drew is unconscious and not breathing, May swiftly performs CPR determined to save her sister. After several attempts, she successfully revives Drew, and the two sisters are able to swim back to the surface and out of the water. May then promises to plan for their next adventure for the following year. The two sisters sit on the diving platform, tightly hugging one another with an expression of relief on their faces. Hope you've enjoyed today's recap. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.